This video is now in session, and weirdly, the debate this year about voting and elections has only been about voting rights and about absentee voting, early voting, voter ID laws. But there's something even bigger that is more threatening to democracy than any of the things that was just mentioned, and that's redistricting. Redistricting is something that could very well tear our Congress apart, and it's already starting to do that. Yet it's being unseen by a lot of people, especially those leaning more towards the liberal side. And regardless of which party redistricts, I guess gerrymanders more than the other party, and it's pretty clear that Republicans gerrymander more than Democrats. But nonetheless, it's something that is very threatening to our democracy, no matter which party does it, because there are cases where Democrats have also done gerrymandering, and it's a very bad thing for democracy, because democracy is about accounting for every single person's voice, and the point of American democracy is to find compromises, to have some moderation involved, because there will always be two different sets of thoughts, or even more than that, and there'll be many perspectives that have to be accounted for in a Congress. But with gerrymandering, it removes all possibilities for moderation, because the purpose of gerrymandering is to have your seat become more partisan, to favor your party. So if you are the Republican Party, and if you want to gerrymander, that means you want House of Representative seats to favor your party, so it's easier to elect your party into that seat. And there's an inherent problem with that, because it invites actors like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and as well as Jim Jordan, and conservatives would also say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who might have some ideas, but are really there for celebrity purposes, really there not to actually get stuff done, but rather to just have brownie points for for making a speech about how Democrats are socialists, or how the Republican Party is unsavable. And the problem with that is everyone in this Congress, everyone in the 117th Congress has to work with each other. But if it's going to become more partisan, it becomes harder to recognize the other side's points and then start to work on a solution. And if the United States does not adapt with new solutions, then the United States, the great experiment, will die, which is why gerrymandering presents a huge risk. Now, I'm not saying that voter suppression is not a bad thing, but the thing is, people have already demonstrated they can get past voter suppression efforts. For example, Georgia, Stacey Abrams in 2020, she was able to help flip Georgia blue, even with its voting laws. In other states, the same thing also occurs. In Arizona, for example, where you have Democratic and Republican operatives in certain states trying to get past restrictive voting laws and still be able to win in elections. So it's possible to go past voter restriction laws, but it's not as easy to go past gerrymandering. Gerrymandering happens every single decade, and once it happens in the first year of a new decade, then it's set in stone for the entire decade, meaning that the redistricting process, which is currently going on right now in many state legislatures, will be cemented for the next 10 years. And that's a very bad thing for both Republicans, for Democrats, and for Americans in general, because we see in districts let's go into Texas. I could put in a Democratic state as well, but I'll put in Texas for this first example. The first example would be Tony Gonzalez. Tony Gonzalez currently holds a competitive seat, and as a result, he is incentivized to hear both sides, to hear both moderate and liberal Democrats in his district, and as well as moderate and conservative Republicans in the Texas's 23rd district. But Republicans are planning to make the seat much more favored for Tony Gonzalez, and while that might help his re-election campaign, what that won't help is accounting for the voices of people in those districts, because more people in that district will be Republican. And meanwhile, you have districts like the 16th district, or maybe even the 35th district that pack in, or the 20th district that packs in more Democratic voters, which then makes districts more Democratic districts that are already there more Democratic, and then it makes Republican districts more Republican. So the issue with that is then you don't have a representative that recognizes the sides or the other side. You don't have Joaquin Castro recognizing the points of Republican moderates. You don't have Tony Gonzalez recognizing the points of the other side, because they don't need to. They're no longer incentivized to actually do that, because they're actually disincentivized to do that because their constituents are now more conservative and more liberal, which means that it's incentivized for a person like Tony Gonzalez to be more conservative. And the problem with that is then you're incentivized to no longer work with the other side, because you don't get anything from that. Another example I could say, New York. New York, currently, if we zoom in, you have Democrats that are trying to remove Republicans and then make their own districts more favorable to themselves. For example, the New York's 4th district and as well as New York's 3rd district. Both of these districts are set to become more favored towards Biden. And again, that will help with both of their elections, their re-election campaigns, but that won't help with actually recognizing the points of the other side. And when you don't have any representatives that recognize the points of the other side, and when you have less competitive districts, then that means you're less likely to get stuff done, because you need a majority for a lot of things. And at this point, our elections have, as a whole, not in individual districts, but as a whole, have gotten more competitive. So that's speaking to like the Senate elections, and as well as the composition of the House as a whole. We see that Democrats have one of the narrowest majorities possible. So even though they're able to get work done, increasingly it's being more and more likely that in a divided Congress, nothing can get done. And it's likely, in addition, that divided Congresses will happen in the future. In the 2022 election, we could very well see Republicans take over the House just because of gerrymandering. And that in itself might not be a problem, but gerrymandering means that you'll elect more Republican, more conservative representatives who do not want to work to actually get stuff done in Congress, because then you'll have a divide between a Democratic Senate and a Democratic presidency, and then a Republican House. And we already see this happening. We've seen this happen in 2010, 2014, where we saw a Congress and a president that would not work with each other, because people in Congress were not incentivized to actually work with each other. It was against their ideals. And it's exactly the situation. You could exactly use Liz Cheney as an example of this. Liz Cheney wanted to work with Democrats regarding Trump and the January 6th insurrection, but that went against her constituents because of how Republican it is, how conservative it is, and as a result, she was stripped of her leadership position, and she is at risk of losing her re-election. And when it comes to other seats, you have other people who are wanting to kick out moderate members in favor of more partisan members, and gerrymandering does exactly that. And when you add on primaries and party primaries, which incentivize partisanship even more, then it becomes a recurrent problem that does eventually is not easily fixable, because when you elect these kinds of people into Congress, then they're also not incentivized to actually change how our redistricting process works. So it's something that has to be solved now before this Congress, before future Congresses become more partisan and less likely to work with each other. And when we have a system that is not willing to work, then we have a dying system and a dying country. So voting suppression and the debate on voter ID laws, it's a good debate, but we have a very big problem that a lot of people are not focusing on, which is redistricting, and we're letting the people who are managing redistricting, which are politicians, get away with it all, just like how it happened in 2010, where we saw more partisanship than ever. And you can see in this map, this is the composition of congressional members throughout the years, and this determines their partisanship, how likely they're voting for a Democratic bill, a Republican bill, a bipartisan bill, and they get each member gets a partisanship score. And you can see here that in 1949, it was actually pretty homogenous. The Republicans and Democrats both voted for each other's bills, and you can see it's in one shape. And this continues through 1951 all the way to here, to 1981, and then as we see redistricting ramping up more and more, then we see more partisanship happen in 1993, and then 1995. You see this split after 1989 from here, where you see a split between Democrats and Republicans, and that has continued on and on and on and on until 2011, which is the last time you see the last time this map was updated. But obviously there are reasons why increased partisanship happens besides gerrymandering, but it's certainly correct to say that gerrymandering holds a lot of responsibility for the increased divisions that we see between Democrats and as well as Republicans. You can see here that there's a dramatic split from the Democratic and Republican Party in Congress in 2011 compared to a year like 1951. And if we have this increase in divide, then we're not going to work with each other. Then that means we're not working with each other. That means that we're not listening to each other, and that means that we don't get anything done. And that is a shame for America, because America was supposed to be a great experiment where it was based off of compromises. But if we increasingly get into a situation where Democrats and Republicans are split on everything and have no kind of bipartisanship is achieved, then that is a very dire sign for our country. So redistricting has to be reformed, and it's something incredibly major and incredibly consequential that's happening in our society, and a lot of us don't even know that it's happening. A lot of us don't even know that redistricting is something that occurs every single decade, which is why this series is here, so that people can be informed about that. You can be informed about redistricting and how gerrymandering is really bad for our political system. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.